story, which is we are currently looking at some major developments out of Ukraine over the past few hours, and some troubling developments this afternoon as it relates to power outages. So something big is about to happen in Ukraine. Thus, the title of today's show, and both sides are actively preparing for it. It's kind of interesting as I'm going through different sources this afternoon and talking to different journalists in the field and who are finding out like what is happening. But there is something big about to happen. And also Europe is about to enter a civil war. So we'll get to that in a moment. But first, it's after 11 p.m. now in Ukraine. The country is almost in total darkness at this hour. If any of you are watching us from Ukraine or Donbass at this hour, send us a message here in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. Like, what are you experiencing right now? Let
and
us
how
know.
are you online?
Right.
If
you happen to have cell service or otherwise, because according to Ukrainian media this afternoon, Russia has struck critical targets and that turned off the lights across most of the country. So Russia has been hitting these thermal power plants 30%. According to Zelensky this afternoon, a spokesman for Ukraine's emergency services says that over 1,000 Ukrainian villages and towns remain without power at this time since Russia's bombardment began last week. So it's been a constant bombardment since the attack on the Crimean Bridge. Zelensky also said earlier today that there is no space left for negotiations with the Putin regime, as he called it. So we're not talking peace. No peace.
I want to point out that he's being very strategic. He's not hitting like the turbines that would take years and years and years to fix. He's actually just hitting parts of the infrastructure that, it's still taking out the power, but he's not taking out infrastructure that is going to take them a very long time to repair.
So now you call them turbines, which I've never heard. Is that how they call? Is that how they call
turbines?
It?
Is another way to pronounce.
Well, he's from Indiana.
Turbines.
Is that?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
You call it turbines.
That's probably my accent. Yeah.
Okay.
Turbines.
Yeah, I say turbine too.
Do you really?
You do?
Oh, well, that's weird because like growing up, I would hear the word, like someone would say toboggan. I'm like, oh, you want to go out on a sled? No. They're like, no, it's a hat. I'm like, what? You call a hat a toboggan? What the hell?
Never heard that.
I've never heard someone call it. Maybe because I'm from
turbines. Yeah, that threw me a little bit too. But I'm with you. I got it in context.
She's the California, so
you can keep
Indiana,
going.
So turbines. Okay. Do you guys all in the chat call them turbines or turbines? I don't know. Anyway.
Okay, but it is also
That's a great
worth
point.
noting.
But it's a really great point because this means that it's not like total destruction for years to come. It's a temporary setback.
Right. Again, we should remember that in 2017, Russian hackers went in and basically turned the whole country of Ukraine off, and that cost billions of dollars and took years to recover from. So if they really wanted to make some destruction, they could just basically turn the power switch off, right. Internet off, infrastructure off. We know this already.
So no negotiations. Okay, great. So we won't talk any peace. That's the plan. We're not going to talk to Putin at all. And also, that's the same thing that Washington said. We're done. We're not talking any peace. Oh, okay. Great. So more people die because of your ego and your Western puppet masters who are running the show. So more people will die because we can't talk about peace.
They let him into NATO, right? So they let him into NATO. So what does he have to worry about?
Did they leave him into NATO?
Who?
Who's in NATO now?
No, they didn't. That's the point.
Oh, that was sarcasm.
If you want to know if they're being, I'm sorry, I'm very sarcastic, but if you want to know if they're being used as puppets, they would be in NATO if they weren't.
Yeah, they're not going to be. But although Ukraine has basically said we're already a de facto NATO partner anyway, so what does it matter? But this afternoon, there's a new partner that's showing up inside of Ukraine, and that's Israel. Ukraine says it will formally request air defenses from Israel. So Ukraine's foreign minister is now saying that they will formally ask Israel to provide air defense systems because of all of these attacks on the infrastructure. They have not so far done this, but now they're going to. And at this hour, we have big news from Ukraine. It looks like NATO and Ukrainian forces are preparing for a major attack on the Kherson region.
Which again, we remind you now, Russia considers that part of inside its borders, and they have warned that attacks inside their borders continues to escalate. So, okay.
Yes, this is Russia. This is Russia. This is the annexed regions, right? It's a border city now. It's a border region. So Russia's Kherson official, Kirill Stemosov, calls for people to evacuate. He issued this warning saying you guys got to get out, evacuate the city as soon as possible, and says Ukraine will begin an offensive on the city of Kherson very soon. Here was his message, and he says, look, we're not going to give up the city, but you need to get out now to protect yourself, he said. So that was his message. And then Russian media, we can play a little bit of this.
Жители Херсона и Херсонской области. По имеющимся у нас.
So he's saying we need to get out to protect yourself now. And they're actively moving people out of Kherson. Russian officials are actively moving people out of this region to taking these precautions. Now, this is being reported not just, actually, Ukraine's quiet on this piece. This is being reported all over Russian media. So Russian media, they're fully aware that this is about to happen. Here it is this afternoon, RT reporting Russia braces for Ukrainian offensive in Kherson, what we know so far. And what we know so far is that Russian authorities have begun relocating residents eastward across the river. And this was, of course, formerly Ukrainian region, joined Russia following the referendum. And according to reports, this afternoon, forces are amassing for a major onslaught. And according to reports out of D.C. this afternoon, out of Washington, the deep state, of course, this is exactly where it's all coming from. The deep state in Washington ahead of the midterm elections to give Democrats a nice boost heading into the election. Colonel Douglas Macgregor writing this afternoon on that exact point.
I mean, that is a crazy association that Democrats will do better if a foreign country advances in the war that we should not have to do with.
But this is what we talked about here last night on the show.
So
it's wag
crazy.
the dog. It's wag the dog, right?
And this is acceptable. If Ukraine does well, Democrats will do well. This association we all agree upon.
Now, this was an old template. I mean, I don't know that this template works anymore, but this is what the template was a number of years ago.
But it is an association we see played out across social media. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to support you've got to support the Biden administration and Democrats and neocons because look, I don't know why. like to make that association. I don't know.
A vote for Democrats is a vote for democracy because, not like they were trying to remove the Green Party from the ballot, but that's what they say. A vote for the Democrats is a vote for democracy. So
yeah, that's exactly right. So we're going to spread democracy around the world. So here's what Colonel Douglas Macgregor wrote this afternoon in a piece, a really good piece that he wrote. Encourage you all to read it, but he specifically talks about this point about D.C. ahead of the midterm elections, and he says, today there are rumors in the media that Kiev might be under pressure to launch more counterattacks against Russian defenses in Kherson in southern Ukraine before the midterm elections in November. At this point, he writes, expending what little remains of Ukraine's lifeblood to expel Russian forces from Ukraine is hardly synonymous with the preservation of the Ukrainian state. It's also doubtful that further sacrifices by Ukrainians will assist the Biden administration in the midterm elections. But this is what they're hoping for, right? They're absolutely hoping for. We're going to use you as cannon fodder. So we're going to send all of these people into Kherson to die. That's exactly what's going to happen.
Well, if they can say that all the money we spent is money well spent, then that hurts them less.
Right. Oh, you mean the money that we spent in Ukraine, the billions? We can't turn on the lights in the United States. We can't afford gas prices or gas right now. We're going to have rolling blackouts. There's people sleeping under overpasses all throughout America. Did you see the numbers today on murder rate? 10% increase, in the huge increase in the amount of murders, a massive increase in the amount of violent crime across the United States, massive increase this year alone. So we got that going for us. But if we have more advancements in Ukraine, then we'll feel better about ourselves somehow.
No, I thought guns overseas brought peace inside our borders.
That's what you're supposed to be told.
Yeah.
So this afternoon, something else big happened. Russia knew that these attacks were coming, clearly. And today, Russian President Vladimir Putin declared martial law over this area. So over these 4 regions that were recently annexed. Here he is in his own words describing what's still happening and the attacks that are still taking place. So declaring martial law. Watch.
If you've got a flat roof like this one right here, and you don't want to spend tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Гибнут мирные люди. Неонацисты используют откровенно террористические методы диверсии на объектах жизнеобеспечения. Устраивают покушения на представителей местных органов власти в Донецкой Народной Республике, Луганской Народной Республике, а также в Херсонской и Запорожской областях до их вступления в состав России действовал режим военного положения. И сейчас нам необходимо оформить этот режим уже в рамках российского законодательства. Поэтому мною подписан указ о введении военного положения в этих 4 субъектах Российской Федерации. В сегодняшней ситуации считаю необходимым наделить дополнительными полномочиями руководителей всех российских регионов. Соответствующий указ также сегодня подписан. Высшие должностные лица субъектов Федерации должны уделять необходимое внимание реализации мер, призванных обеспечить безопасность людей, охрану и антитеррористическую защищенность критически важных объектов, поддержание общественного порядка.
And the maintenance of public order. So, according to sources I've spoken to this afternoon, Ukrainian forces are amassing toward the city of toward the area of Kherson. Russian authorities have begun relocating residents eastward across the river. And a bunch of big things that will change for people after the introduction of martial law. So what does this mean in the DPR, the LPR, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions? So here's sort of a breakdown. I'm just going to go through just a couple of points. So first of all, what martial law means for this is security of all military, transport, municipal, and other facilities is strengthened. In general, everything that is important for conducting defensive maneuvers and maintaining life will be guarded. It will no longer be possible to cut past the fence of the only boiler house in town, is what they're basically saying. Number 2, civilians will be relocated to safe neighborhoods. Number 3, entry and movement throughout the territory where martial law is declared is now restricted. All need passes and permits from the military. This is coming from Eva Bartlett this afternoon. Soldiers have the right to inspect any vehicles. All parties and religions whose propaganda undermines the defense of those regions are temporarily banned. The military may enlist civilians to fight fires, dig trenches, or clear rubble after enemy shelling.
Jeez.
Authorities may take from residents of regions where martial law has been declared. They may take their vehicles or their real estate, which they then decide if they need to use for defense. And it says specifically, compensation is mandatory. We must pay you for your house if we take it. We must pay you for your car if we take it, like eminent domain.
Yes.
Basically. Number 7, strikes, rallies, or other mass events are prohibited. A curfew shall be imposed. The military are allowed to check documents, search homes, vehicles. Violators, if caught, will be detained for up to 30 days. Number 9, military censorship is introduced. The Army has the right to read all of your letters, all of your messages on the internet, and to listen to all conversations. This is Russia saying this about these regions now. A separate court order for this is in civilian life. It is not required. As in civilian life is not required. So they don't have to seek court order to listen in on you right now in these 4 regions. All civilians are prohibited from carrying transmitting radios. That does not apply to cell phones. So you can't carry a transmitting radio, which you would think would be way more, the cell phone would be way more damning or problematic than
would think.
Than an old transmitting radio.
This was done by the Nazis in World War II, that they outlawed radios. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there you go. We would like to repeat, all restrictions are only for the territory where a special regime is in force. So those 4 regions. So that's martial law under Vladimir Putin this afternoon. So they say it's for the protection of the people, and something big is absolutely about to happen in this region, and we also got word the massing of forces in Belarus. So
remember, these people voted to become a part of Russia, knowing they would continue to be under attack. And they voted this, they thought they would be getting extra protection. This may be in line with what a lot of them thought would happen and would need to happen in order for the final frontier, the final battle. I don't know that for sure, but we heard so many civilians when they were voting saying, we need the protection, we need this now. So.
New life form in our chat says, Clayton, it sounds like you're reading the Patriot Act. right?
Yeah.
You know, in the United States, they did it, of course, under the idea of like protection as well.
But we didn't get a notice like this martial law.
Like, here's what's happening. So this is temporary, of course, and we'll learn more about this. But again, you have the temporary governor right now of Kherson, the Russia's Kherson official, saying get out now for your own safety. So something big is about to happen, and clearly from the NATO side, trying to win points in Washington to try to score points using Ukrainians as cannon fodder. Ultimately in a defeatist move, according to Colonel McGregor, of course, and many others. Also today, Ukrainian forces continued to shell the hydraulic dam and power station, a hydroelectric dam and power station in Kherson area as well. Their goal here, according to reports, is to flood the entire area. There's no other reason for it. They're trying to hit the infrastructure of this. So here is that hydroelectric plant that you're looking at. Just to give you an idea how bad the flooding would be, more than 21,000 cubic meters of water per second travels through this puppy. 21,000 cubic meters of water per second travels through this. So the idea, of course, is if they keep attacking this, then they'll flood the entire region. That appears to be the goal. Also appears to be the goal to attack the nuclear power plant. And this afternoon, we got word from that Russian forces had stopped another major terrorist attack on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. This time, Ukraine used 2 full battalions, more than 30 boats to try to attack it. Now, you recall about 2 months ago, they tried to do the same thing in the early morning hours and it was stopped. This time, they've doubled the size or tripled the size of their attack. Russia says they stopped the attack and more than 90 Ukrainian soldiers were killed. 30 boats were also were destroyed as well. So they really want to blow up this nuclear power plant. They're really itching to do it, and hydroelectric plant. So this would be a lot of fun
for all
them.
of us.
Yeah, it'd
Thanks.
be great for everybody. So thanks for that. By the way, I haven't heard a peep from the International Atomic Energy Agency on this.
They filed their report. They're done.
2 months ago, a month ago, they filed their report, which was like weak-kneed and didn't do anything.
That was a check.
What should the future deliver? Progress?
And then they're like, we're done. We got to go on holiday. So you're gonna keep bombing that thing. A lot of people are gonna die. Millions could die. That's fine. We got to go. I got to go eat some cheese back in France or wherever I'm going back to.
I think they're in Brussels.
Meanwhile, here's a question for you. Here's a sort of a thought experiment question for you. Are we headed for a civil war in Europe? Because it's starting to really look like that. If you look at the protests in Germany, you look at the protests in Prague and France, all through the weekend and continuing with cost of living problems. I'm hearing more and more references to civil war in Europe. The American Conservative writes this: the threat of civil war in Europe. Here's the piece today, outlining the clashes that are unfolding throughout Europe as social crises in Europe face escalation this winter. We're seeing massive protests all across Europe, citizens and street demonstrations. If the crisis lasts longer, they write, it cannot be ruled out that terrorist groups will form, as was the case during the anti-refugee protests, and that we could see all sorts of communities torn apart. Over the winter, it wouldn't come as a surprise if some of the developed nations in Europe start to see more serious forms of civil unrest. And authorities are not optimistic. Stephen Kramer, president of Domestic Intelligence Office for the state, told German broadcasters the legitimate protests will be infiltrated by extremists and that it's likely that some will turn violent. They will likely be worse than what has already been seen, like what we saw during the COVID pandemic, partly violent confrontations, but much worse, basically.
But you didn't see a lot of that in Europe. Europe was pretty, even-handed during the pandemic. But maybe now people are tired of being stripped of their rights, tired of being stripped of the right to live a life with, I don't know about the right, but the ability to live the life that they knew before. And they've had enough.
Let's be clear, and we can hear from our viewers on this. And I'm sure that's one of those moments where people say, don't you remember those protests in Italy? There were certainly protests in Italy. There were protests. Yeah. But the media kept them quiet. Right, the media
that's what Oak Tree and Chet ask, why are we not hearing this from the mainstream media?
Oh, I'll get to that in a second. And this is going to blow your freaking mind. So actually, let me just do it right now. This afternoon, the BBC just prepared secret scripts that they're handing out to news anchors and internally floating around the BBC that they'll print in articles and so forth, again, that will be read on broadcast, if the energy shortages start causing blackouts or loss of gas supplies this winter. This is according to The Guardian this afternoon. BBC is preparing secret scripts. Let me get this big giant banner off here. BBC prepares secret scripts for possible use in winter blackouts. The scripts set out how corporations will reassure the public events in the major power losses. So they'll basically be the scripts that are seen by The Guardian will set out how the corporation would reassure the public in the event that a major loss of power causes mobile phone networks, internet access, banking systems, or traffic lights to fail all across England, Wales, and Scotland. Northern Ireland would be unaffected because its electricity grid is shared with the Republic of Ireland. The public would be advised to use car radios, battery-powered receivers to listen to emergency broadcasts. They would listen to one draft BBC script warns that a blackout could last for up to 2 days, with hospitals and police placed under extreme pressure. Another says the government has said it's hoped the power will be restored in 36 to 48 hours. So that's what they want them to say in the script. Just read this on the air.
Okay, whether they know that or not.
Power will be restored in 36 to 48 hours. This is what you're going to be told to say. Whether or not that's true or not, different parts of Britain will start to receive intermittent supplies before then. Can you imagine, just imagine a news anchor in Britain. I can't do the British accent, but we've received word from the government that power will be restored in the next 36 to 48 hours. So don't worry about it, nothing to see here. Different parts of Britain will start to receive intermittent supplies before then, says the script I was just handed by these propagandists. Like, unbelievable. They're handing these out and you wonder why. They wonder why no one trusts the media. Like last night in the show, we showed you that propaganda. We showed you that BBC reporter who I got deeper details on today from a source of mine. That BBC reporter who was laying there in the grass pretending to be reporting. Like that's the same guy who was refused to cover the stories in Gaza and in attacks and stayed in the hotel while people were awful stories.
Well,
this is the laziness and propagandists that run these mainstream media companies.
And think of how complicit the media is when they know that Zelensky's in front of a green screen, like we highlighted yesterday. He's standing there in front of a green screen giving these speeches, and the media is complicit because they're taking that and they're running with it. There's media people there making that, and they're making those videos.
Yeah. When we talk about the climate in our last segment today, we're going to talk about just the way that the media has this agenda to make you anxious about the environment and how irresponsible that is because they just assume that you are illiterate or innumerate.
Right. And finally, on this point, I'll say that Germany has issued an ultimatum today. So we're talking about this civil war and where these battle lines are being drawn. Germany coming out today issuing an ultimatum on Ukrainian territories. The foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, says any concessions to Russia in the ongoing conflict would be naive. Basically saying, buck up. You cannot be naive. We're not negotiating with them. We are moving forward in a big, big way. And we will have to push back for Ukraine's territorial peace, land territory, and we will not, unless we go back to the 2014 lines, we will not be doing anything else. We need to draw a line in this. So this is where your German government is coming down on this. While you can't pay for heating in Germany, food shortages. Germans are in for a really rough time, but certainly your leaders know where their loyalties are. They're right there in Ukraine.
Yeah, they don't seem to mind. They won't be cold or hungry.
No.
You would assume.
No.
Did you know there's a quick and totally free way to test your testosterone levels? You probably know testosterone plays a critical role.